guys think, now it's time to do a press event, or is it something that you kind of steer away from with even smaller businesses and everything?
I do steer away from press events because the media is skeptical of things that are put on just for them. There's not really enough meat to a story to cover that. Sometimes you can get like a TV camera, what they call B-roll, where the anchor person talks over the video that you see. Like maybe the opening of the Brandywine Festival of the Arts or something like that. But although that's not a good example because that's so big that it would clearly get press. But if you were, like trying to do a press event on this concept, you might get that kind of coverage. But if there's some initial coverage of it, then you would have to come up with a whole new component of it in order to justify a press event and to get them to come. Because it's yesterday's news. They're not going to do a follow-up. You may think, oh yeah, and they may say, oh yeah, keep in touch. But let me tell you, and they may mean it, but their editor is not buying it.
Right.
But how about innovation? I come from a world that we're always creating, mostly in New York City. We're always trying to be better than what we are.
Innovation is good.
Innovation is like where I come from. You know, forget about what everyone's doing around the block. How can we become better? To draw people in.
Right.
So my brain thinks innovation.
Well, it's got to be an innovative idea or concept that the audience or a lot of people are going to benefit by. That it's going to touch a lot of people.
But it's new, it's exciting, it's fresh. People gravitate to that, no? It's like new packaging. You see new packaging on the market. I know when I walk past Target and they have the new packaging, I'm like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. That's not press-worthy. Packaging is not.
Well,
because it's packaging.
From marketing and from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah. But that's the difference. When you market something, you basically have control over how it's going to appear.
Right.
When you're working with the press, you really don't have control.
Right, because they can do what they want to do with the information that they receive.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they will tell you they're not in business to get you business. So
they expose you in whatever
they can
way
provide
that they
you with
want
exposure
to.
if it's a good story. But I haven't heard this in a long time. But they can come back and say, oh, I think you should just place an ad. It's not a story. Why don't you just place an ad with us? So keep that in the back of your mind. If I called and pitched the story, might they say, why don't you just place an ad? Yeah.
To that point, how do we work with you as a PR guy? I mean, what do you usually do first, or when you're looking at a small business or an entrepreneur, and they say, okay, obviously I don't have enough time. I need to get a PR person to work with me. What usually do you go about?
Well, I always, get together with a person and say, tell me all about your business. And then they'll start talking for a while, and then I'll probably start interrupting them. Because I'm thinking, okay, I get it, but now I've got to start the questioning as if I'm the reporter. And, how would this affect a lot of people? How is this new? When I worked at AstraZeneca, any kind of news has to have a study behind it. So how can you validate this? Is this just your opinion? And that's fine if it is, but it's not newsworthy enough. And then, really, if I see some potential for story ideas, then I'll say that. We may need to do some more work to fine-tune this, but I think there's some potential here. Like when I met Grundner, I knew immediately that we could get some press because he's a young guy and his wife died. So there's the appeal to that. When I started working with this Cancer Care Connection, it's basically a telephone line with social workers at the other end to help people with anything non-medical having to do with cancer. I knew right away there was very little news value to that. First of all, it was too heartwarming, but it didn't have any kids or any animals or stuff that makes heartwarming stories. There's just no story element to it. So I went in a different direction. And actually, I said to the woman there, you should do the pharmaceutical rep thing. Have people go out into the doctor's offices, and now that's what I'm doing. So you have to go in and be very open to whatever it is, whatever story the person has to tell you. And then the PR person, should know, if the PR person starts seeing some excitement or enthusiasm in them, then you know there's a morsel of hope. If you're not really seeing them get excited, they're either not that good at PR, because you got to be excited about what you're pitching, or maybe you just don't have the story at that time.
And how long usually does it take? I know every time you can't get a hit, but from when you initially start to when you think you can get a placement,
Right.
What's the average time when that happens?
Well, that can take a couple of years, really. It depends on all kinds of factors, but I'll give you an example. I started working for something called the Arts and Business Council of Greater Philadelphia 2.5 years ago. And what they do, briefly, is they bring together businesses and business volunteers with arts and cultural groups for mutual benefit. So I started, and I have some great stories of business people who got a renewed sense of excitement about accounting, seriously, because they created an accounting system for some museum that all they had was their mother writing the checks, and those type stories. And so what I accomplished with the press was I got them to know that such a thing existed. I wasn't getting any stories, but I got them to know that such a thing existed after the first year. Going into the second year, there's awards every year for people who do this kind of thing. Then I began to get some press. And then last June, I had an event that obviously will be extremely valuable when I tell you what it was. Robert Redford came and spoke on the value of businesses working with the arts. Well, then, the reporters came right away. But what really made the difference is they already knew me and knew who I was and knew what I was telling them about. So when they came, they didn't come to ask Robert Redford about his latest movie or what movie he was doing next. They came to talk about what he wanted to talk about, which was arts and businesses working together. So that was a 2-year process.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? How can you leverage not only personal relationships that you may try to build with reporters, but also can you leverage social media in a way to get your message out?
Well, I think that you can. I have a lot to learn about social media because really it's direct to people. And I think with every year that passes, it's going to have more and more power. Because this generation of people reading the newspaper and watching the news is dying off, and the generation that's coming are people who, that's how they get their information. So right now, I don't know that it crosses all that much, but I think in the future it'll be one and the same. I mean, just the fact that all the TV stations all have Facebook pages, and they all have social media. The reporters have followers. That's the media coming together.
Do you have a Facebook and a Twitter account?
I don't have a Twitter account. I do have a Facebook page.
You have an iPod?
I do now, yeah.
An iPad?
I bought an iPhone about a month ago.
No, iPad.
No.
I'd love to make a comment about what you just said. I recently had an experience where a reporter was following the page of a client, saw a picture that we posted of the product, and called us wanting to do a story just on the picture we posted. We think everything's newsworthy, so, to a certain extent, but sometimes you just never know. You put it out there and might get something back, without any necessarily work. So yes, leverage social media by using it plenty, because you don't know what it will reap in terms of traditional media.
Yeah. Another way with this cancer program, it's mostly women, nurses and social workers who would tell their patients about the service. So I said, let's do a picture and a profile of each of these social workers so that the potential referral sources will have a sense of who they're sending their patients to. Because I happen to feel that that's going to mean a lot to nurses and social workers. The doctor probably wouldn't care less, but I figured out that he's not my target. So by me showing up and sending stuff in the mail, that's fine, that introduces them. But if they can go onto Facebook and see, oh, she's a social worker and she went to the same college that I did, or whatever that is, then there's a connection made. Then they're even more likely to make that referral.